When you think of a medieval castle, you might imagine knights charging in armor, kings at banquets, or sieges that shook stone walls. But what was it really like to live inside one of those cold, echoing fortresses day after day, year after year? Beyond the battles and legends, castles were full of ordinary routines, quiet rituals, and the often overlooked details of daily survival. In this story, we'll walk through the slow mornings, the endless chores, and the fleeting moments of joy that filled a castle resident's life. It's not the history of kings and wars. It's the history of bread ovens, straw beds, and the sound of footsteps on stone floors. So settle in and let the boring but fascinating details of castle life carry you through time. Chapter 1. Waking before dawn, the quiet labor of servants. Imagine yourself in the chill of a medieval morning, long before the first rays of sunlight seep through the castle's narrow arrow-slit windows. The air inside the stone walls is damp and heavy with yesterday's smoke, the faint smell of sweat, and the lingering tang of cooked meat that has seeped into the tapestries. You are not the lord of the castle, nor one of the knights who hold stories of bravery. Instead, you are among the invisible multitude, a servant who will never be remembered by name, but whose labor holds the castle together in silence. Your day begins in darkness. The rooster has not yet crowed, and the surrounding village is still asleep. Yet inside the castle, footsteps already stir. Servants rise from straw pallets in shared quarters, shaking off the straw and scratching at lice, an ever-present nuisance in the Middle Ages. Bedding is thin, often just a rough woolen blanket if one is lucky. For many, sleep is shallow, disturbed by the murmurs of others, the coughing of those ill, or the gnawing hunger that rarely disappears. The first task of the day is fire. Without fire, nothing else can begin. One of the younger boys, no older than 12, is responsible for carrying smoldering embers from the kitchen's great hearth to relight smaller fires in rooms that demand warmth. The Lord's chamber, the chapel, and the kitchen itself. Imagine carrying those glowing coals inside a small iron container, wrapped in cloth to keep the heat from escaping. If he fails and the coals die out, someone must attempt to strike new sparks with flint and steel. A tedious process that delays everything. Fire is not just for warmth. It is life itself, the foundation of cooking, light, and even protection. Meanwhile, water must be hauled. The castle, perched high for defense, is rarely near a convenient stream. If there is no well within the walls, buckets must be carried up from the village or fetched from cisterns. This is grueling, repetitive work. A bucket of water is heavy, and yet it takes many to fill the great cauldrons for cooking and cleaning. For the servant, this labor is endless, their muscles aching from the climb of narrow stone stairways again and again. You might pause to catch your breath in a shadowed corridor, listening to your own heartbeat echoing against cold stone. Before continuing upward with your burden, bread is the first meal, but not for you. The Lord and his household will be served fresh loaves from the bakehouse. You, like the other servants, eat the leftovers of yesterday. Coarse rye bread, often stale, dipped in weak ale to soften it. Ale is safer than water, since boiling during brewing kills bacteria, but its weak alcohol is no comfort at this hour. There is no leisure in eating. Servants gulp quickly, standing in corners, before hurrying to the next duty. Now, imagine the castle itself awakening. The courtyard fills with movement. Stable boys grooming horses, scullions scrubbing pots, laundresses wringing water from heavy woolens at the washing area. Every corner hums with activity, yet all of it unnoticed by the higher-born residents. The rhythm of the castle depends on unseen hands. One particular task falls to the maidservants, preparing the Lord's chamber. His bed is not the simple straw pallet you sleep on, but a heavy wooden frame with ropes strung across like a lattice. A feather mattress lies upon it, and woolen blankets or furs cover the top. Each morning, the bedding must be beaten to chase. out fleas and lice, then carefully smoothed. Chamber pots are emptied discreetly, their contents carried outside to be disposed of, often into a cesspit, though at times they find their way into the moat. Imagine the smell of that task, the way it clings to your hands even after washing, for young girls in service. Mornings also mean tending to the tapestries and rushes that line the floors. Rushes are reeds scattered with herbs, meant to absorb dirt and mask odors. Over time, they grow filthy, mixed with food scraps, bones, and whatever else falls to the ground. To change them is exhausting. Bundles of old rushes are hauled away, while new ones must be cut and carried in. The herbs, lavender, thyme, rosemary, provide a fleeting fragrance, soon lost to the stronger stench of daily life. Beyond the routine lies hierarchy. Even among servants, there is an order. The steward oversees household affairs. The chamberlain supervises chambers, and beneath them are endless ranks of boys, girls, men, and women, each with a narrowly defined role. If you are a kitchen scullion, you scrub pots until your hands are raw, your face blackened by soot, your back bent. If you are a laundress, you soak and beat linen until your arms ache. If you are a page, your work involves endless errands, carrying messages, polishing armor, assisting knights in training. Each position is not just a job but a station, one you rarely rise above, and yet, despite the monotony, there's a strange rhythm to this life. The sound of bells marks the hours, matins at dawn, prime at sunrise, then terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. The religious calendar governs everything, reminding each servant that their work, no matter how dull, is also a form of devotion. Even the act of scrubbing a floor can be seen as service to God when performed with humility. Still, you cannot ignore the weight of exhaustion. Imagine the blisters on your hands, the soreness in your back, the smell of smoke in your hair that never quite washes out. These are the unnoticed burdens of those who live in the shadows of the castle walls. Servants rarely speak of dreams or ambitions, for survival itself is task enough. You do not think of tomorrow, only of the next duty, the next command, the next bell. And so, as the sun finally rises over the fields beyond the castle, painting the stone walls golden, the day has only just begun. The Lord has yet to rise, the nights still slumber, but you, the servant, have already lived through hours of toil. Without you, the castle cannot function, yet your name will never be carved in chronicles or sung in ballads. The question lingers, how did generations of people endure such lives, invisible and forgotten, yet utterly essential to the grandeur of medieval castles? Chapter 2. Work, Duty, and the Routine of Survival. If mornings in a medieval castle began with roosters, bells, or the sound of water being poured into wooden basins, the bulk of the day was dedicated to labor. Life inside the stone walls was not a life of leisure for most who lived there. The castle was a living organism, and every inhabitant from the lord and lady to the humblest servant was a part of its functioning. Each person had roles dictated not only by status, but by the practical demands of the building itself. Castles were not static monuments of stone. They were centers of administration, fortifications of defense, and households that required constant upkeep, the lord's burdens of leadership. While the word lord might conjure images of reclining, men in fur-lined cloaks sipping wine in candlelit halls, much of the work of a medieval lord was administrative, repetitive, and often quite dull. A lord was responsible for overseeing justice within his domain, settling disputes between tenants, and ensuring the collection of rents, taxes, and goods owed by those living on his land. Imagine sitting at a long wooden table for hours while peasants lined up, some to argue over a small strip of field that had been plowed too far, others to complain about wandering pigs that had destroyed a neighbor's garden. These disputes could stretch on endlessly as each villager presented their side in the hopes of securing favor. The lord often relied on clerks or bailiffs to keep written records of decisions, using rolls of parchment carefully stored in wooden chests. Beyond this, the lord needed to organize defense. This meant regular inspections of the castle's fortifications, checking the condition of the drawbridge, ensuring the gatehouse was properly manned, and arranging the repair of outer walls that might have crumbled under wind and rain. It was slow, technical work. Yet a single neglected crack in a wall could spell disaster during a siege. In the afternoons, if visitors or emissaries arrived, the lord would spend long stretches in negotiation. Diplomacy was not dramatic or filled with heroic speeches. More often, it involved hours of exchanging gifts, listening to carefully phrased words, and debating marriages, land boundaries, or trade rights. These conversations, filled with formality, could drag on for days. The lady of the castle. If the lord's work was justice and defense, the lady's realm was the household. In truth, her duties were managerial in nature and could be compared to those of a modern administrator. She oversaw the storage and distribution of food, kept an eye on supplies, and ensured there was always enough grain, salted meat, or dried peas to last through the winter months. Every morning, she might review the kitchens. How much bread had been baked in the great ovens? Were there enough eggs collected? Was ale brewing proceeding as it should? She also supervised the work of young women serving in the household, assigning them tasks such as spinning wool, embroidering cloth for banners, or sewing new tunics for guards. Her responsibilities did not end there. In the absence of her husband, the lady could serve as de facto ruler of the castle. She heard petitions, handled disputes, and even organized defenses if enemies threatened. Historical accounts show that women like Nahola de la Haye in Lincolnshire played crucial roles in commanding castles under siege. Yet, much of her day involved detailed, monotonous work ledger checking, supervising meals, listening to reports about livestock, and ensuring discipline among the many workers who kept the castle alive. Servants and the pulse of labor. For the servants, each hour of the day was filled with small, repetitive tasks. A castle required constant cleaning despite its stone walls. Floors had to be swept, rushes changed, and animal waste removed from courtyards. Servants carried water up and down stone staircases, endlessly filling barrels and jugs in the kitchens. Work was hot, smoky, and relentless. Fires needed constant tending, and meals had to be prepared for dozens or even hundreds of people. A castle feast might seem grand, but the labor behind it involved turning spits over roaring fires for hours, grinding grain with heavy querns, and fetching ingredients from storerooms that could be several flights of stairs away. Young boys often worked as pages, darting about to deliver messages, polish armor, or attend to knights. They learned by observing, their childhood marked less by play than by constant service. Outside the walls, peasants tied to the castle lands worked the fields. They cut hay, plowed with oxen, harvested grain, and delivered their portion of produce to the castle stores. Their relationship to the castle was both one of dependence and obligation. For them, the castle was a symbol of authority and protection, but also of taxes and burdens that consumed much of their labor. The soldiers and guards. No castle was complete without its garrison. Guards manned the towers, pacing along the walls and keeping careful watch over the horizon. Their shifts could be long and monotonous, broken only by meals of coarse bread and ale. Knights, too, resided within castles, though their work was less glamorous than romantic stories suggest. Much of their time was spent in practice training. In the courtyard with blunted weapons, riding horses to maintain their skill, or polishing armor to ensure it would not rust. The armor itself, made of iron or steel, was heavy and required constant oiling. A knight's day also included ceremonial obligations, escorting guests, attending meals with their lord, and offering visible reminders of strength. Yet boredom was a constant. Weeks or months might pass without conflict, leaving soldiers to drill endlessly, maintain weapons, and wait for action that rarely came. Food, feasting, and the daily bread. Meals were central to the rhythm of the day. The Great Hall was not always filled with feasts, but daily meals for the household could be communal affairs. Bread, thick pottage, a kind of vegetable stew, cheese, and ale formed the staples. On feast days or when noble visitors arrived, roasted meats, spiced dishes, and sweet treats might appear. Showing off the castle's wealth, eating was also highly regulated. The lord and lady sat at a raised table, while others arranged themselves according to rank. The order of seating reflected the hierarchy of the castle. Even the manner of eating was governed by custom. Certain dishes were reserved for nobles, while servants and guards often shared the simpler fare. After meals, scraps were gathered for the poor or fed to dogs and pigs. Leftovers were carefully stored, salted, or dried, since waste was frowned upon in a world where hunger was a constant threat. Rhythm of the afternoon and evening. After midday, the castle's work continued. Fields outside the walls bustled with activity, while inside, repairs were carried out, tools mended, and supplies checked. Craftsmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons might work in the outer bailey, producing everything from iron nails to wooden carts. As the sun lowered, prayers once again marked the hours. Vespers brought residents to chapels, where voices joined in chanting psalms. Religious devotion was as routine as breathing, a framework shaping each day from dawn to dusk. Evenings in the Great Hall were often quieter than popular imagination suggests. While there were occasions of music, storytelling, or games of dice, many evenings were spent in dim candlelight, with clerks writing records, guards preparing for the night watch, and servants cleaning the remains of the day's activities. When the torches burned low, the castle settled into silence. Doors were barred, portcullises lowered, and guards posted on the walls. The air grew cold as fires died down, and people retreated to their sleeping places, lords to their chambers, servants to shared dormitories, soldiers to guardrooms. By looking closely at the workday of a medieval castle resident, you see that it was not all tournaments and battles, nor endless feasting in candlelit halls. Instead, it was a world of routines, obligations, and ceaseless duties. Every stone corridor echoed with footsteps carrying buckets, every hall filled with murmurs of business, and every courtyard bore the mark of human effort. But this raises a lingering thought. If so much of life was dictated by duty and survival, how did people find moments of joy, personal reflection, or escape within the castle walls? Were there small pleasures hidden among the monotony of daily labor? Chapter 3. Leisure, celebration, and the fleeting joys of castle life. If duty and work filled most hours of the day, there were still moments, sometimes brief, sometimes grand, when life in a medieval castle allowed for relaxation, celebration, and entertainment. These moments, whether a simple song sung by the fire or a week-long festival, reminded residents that life was more than toil and obligation. They also reveal how medieval people sought balance between survival and enjoyment, duty and delight. The small pleasures of daily life. Even within the rigid walls of a castle, small daily diversions offered relief from monotony. In the evenings, after meals, servants, guards, and even nobles might gather in the Great Hall. There, a minstrel or musician would sometimes play a lute or pipe, filling the chamber with soft tunes. Storytelling was common, tales of local heroes, biblical parables, or exaggerated accounts of legendary knights. Dice and board games were also popular. Games like tables, an ancestor of backgammon, or nine men's Morris, played with simple carved pieces, could absorb hours of attention. These games required little beyond a wooden board and tokens, making them easy diversions for both soldiers and servants. For children living in the castle, whether the offspring of nobles or the young pages and maidens in training, play took on more physical forms. They chased each other through courtyards, practiced mock swordplay with sticks, or played simple ball games. Even in a world dominated by duty, children found ways to turn routine into amusement. Festivals and feasts. The true highlights of castle life came with feast days and festivals. The medieval calendar was rich with celebrations tied to the church. And agricultural cycles, Christmas, Easter, harvest festivals, and saints' days. On these occasions, the great hall transformed. Long trestle tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, freshly baked bread, and flagons of ale and wine. Cooks produced elaborate dishes, peacocks redressed in their feathers after roasting, pies filled with spiced fruit, and stews, rich with exotic herbs if trade had brought them. The air was alive with music, laughter, and the hum of conversation. For the nobles, feasts were a chance to display wealth and hospitality. For servants and guards, it meant extra food, fewer restrictions, and perhaps a rare chance to eat their fill. Even peasants from the surrounding lands might be invited, or at least allowed to gather outside the walls for shared merriment. Entertainment during festivals could be elaborate. Jugglers, acrobats, and wandering musicians performed in exchange for coin. Traveling troubadours sang songs of distant lands or composed verses celebrating their host. In some cases, actors staged morality plays, religious dramas that both instructed and entertained. Hunting, tournaments, and noble pastimes for lords and knights. Leisure often meant activities that doubled as preparation for war. Hunting was a favored pursuit. Groups rode out into forests with hounds, chasing deer, boar, or birds of prey. Hunting was not only a sport, but also a means of asserting dominance over land and resources. The game caught could end up on the castle's table, reinforcing the idea that noble leisure still served practical ends. Tournaments, when organized, were even grander. Though less frequent than stories suggest, they were central displays of martial skill. Knights in heavy armor clashed in jousts, their lances splintering as they charged at one another. Others fought in mock battles, showing their endurance and prowess. These events where dangerous injuries were common, but they were also spectacles. Nobles cheered from stands, ladies bestowed favors such as ribbons, and common folk flocked to watch the pageantry. Tournaments broke the routine of daily life and gave knights a chance to prove themselves outside of actual battle. Meanwhile, noble women and ladies of the castle often engaged in pursuits such as embroidery, music, and reading for those who were literate. Though quieter than hunting or tournaments, these pastimes were valued as demonstrations of refinement and culture. Religion and the comfort of ritual, another form of leisure, though it may not seem such to modern eyes, was found in religious ritual. The cycle of prayers, masses, and holy days gave structure and meaning beyond survival. Special holy days might involve processions, singing, and the adornment of chapels with flowers or candles. Pilgrimages also offered rare opportunities for travel. Nobles or knights might journey to shrines, both as acts of devotion and as excuses to leave the confines of the castle. These pilgrimages often blended duty with adventure, providing experiences that were both spiritual and socially rewarding moments of escape for the common resident. While nobles rode out to hunt or feasted in splendor, the lower-ranking residents of a castle sought joy in simpler ways. Guards shared jokes during watch shifts, kitchen servants sang as they stirred cauldrons, and stable hands found quiet pride in grooming horses until their coats gleamed. Festivals, when they included the wider household, gave them rare chances to drink more freely, dance in courtyards, and feel part of a larger celebration. Music and laughter broke down the rigid lines of hierarchy, if only for a few hours, before duty once again reclaimed its hold. Nightfall and reflection. As evening descended after a day of both labor and leisure, the castle quieted. Torches flickered, shadows stretched along the stone walls, and silence fell over the courtyards. For some, it was a moment of prayer before sleep. For others, a chance to sit by a dwindling fire and speak quietly with friends. Despite the grandeur of castles, their inhabitants lived lives filled with the same human desires as people today: the need for rest, companionship, and joy. Entertainments may seem simple or formal, but they carry deep significance in a world where hardship was constant. Closing reflection, the rhythms of castle life were not unbroken chains of duty. Amid the stone walls and strict hierarchies, laughter rang out, music drifted through the halls, and feasts turned cold nights into warm gatherings. For every hour spent laboring, there were brief, cherished hours spent celebrating, resting, or sharing in community. And so the story of a medieval castle is not only one of defense and survival, but also of human spirit, how people carved out spaces of joy amid the burdens of responsibility. Thank you for spending your time here with me on Quiet, Boring Sleep. I hope this journey through history helped you unwind, slow down, and maybe even drift a little closer to rest. If you enjoyed this calm storytelling and would like more gentle history to fall asleep to, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot, and it helps me continue creating these quiet stories for you. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.